The Crimson Flame was an enigma. Shrouded in myth and secrecy, its existence was a whispered legend on the lips of Earth's most senior commanders. For centuries, humanity's leaders had believed the ship was nothing more than a relic, a forgotten piece of history. But now, with the Korak closing in on Earth's capital, it was their last hope. Captain Anya Solari stood on the bridge, her hands gripping the cold steel of the command chair as she gazed out at the vast expanse of space, feeling the weight of her people's survival resting on her shoulders. Ready to launch, Captain, her first officer, Commander Elias Quinn, said, his voice a mixture of determination and uncertainty. The fleet is in position. We have one shot at this. Solari nodded, her mind sharp, calculating. The mission was simple. Break through the Korak blockade surrounding Earth's atmosphere and strike a crippling blow to their forces. They had to give the people of Earth a reason to fight, to believe that they could win. They had no choice. Prepare the Crimson Flame for immediate departure, Solari ordered. Activate all systems. Full stealth mode. The massive warship hummed to life as her crew, a mix of experienced veterans and fresh recruits, went to work. The corridors reverberated with the sounds of rapid footsteps and clattering control panels as the ship's crew scrambled to get everything in order. Anya's mind was focused, her every sense tuned to the task ahead. She couldn't afford to be distracted. Failure wasn't an option. She knew what would happen if they didn't succeed. Earth would fall, and humanity's last remnants would be erased from history. But as the ship powered up, something felt wrong. A small tremor ran through the hull, then a series of beeps. An alert flashed across her console. "Captain," Quinn said sharply, his eyes wide. "There's a disruption in the navigation system. Someone has tampered with the core." "What? How?" Before Solari could respond, the lights flickered. A deafening roar echoed through the ship as alarms blared. The entire Crimson Flame shuddered. Panic rippled through the crew as the ship's trajectory went haywire, veering dangerously off course. The entire bridge crew struggled to maintain control, but it was clear that sabotage had occurred. "Get us back on course, now," Solari shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Who did this?" Scanning for unauthorized access, Quinn said, his face pale as he worked the controls. "There's a backdoor code embedded in the system. Whoever did this has access to our core. They're shutting down our defenses." The realization hit Solari like a punch to the gut. The sabotage wasn't just an accident. It was deliberate. Someone on this ship didn't want humanity to succeed. "Get me security or the double." Solari snapped. "We have a traitor on board." Just as her crew scrambled to identify the saboteur, the ship's hull trembled once again, this time from the sound of distant explosions. The Korak fleet, aware of their presence, had launched a devastating counterattack. The Crimson Flame was under heavy fire, the shields struggling to hold against the barrage of alien weaponry. The battle had begun, but they were at a severe disadvantage. Quinn's voice cut through the panic. "We need to fight back, Captain. We're sitting ducks without our defenses." Solari gritted her teeth, staring at the holographic battlefield displayed before her. "Activate the Crimson Flame's primary weapons, all of them. We fight, no matter what." Just as the order was given, a voice came over the intercom, chilling and cold. "Captain Solari, you're too late. The Korak will destroy you, just as they've destroyed everything else." The message was cryptic, but there was no mistaking the threat. Solari's eyes narrowed as she turned to her crew, determined. "We might be down, but we're not out. Set a course, full speed ahead. It's time to remind the galaxy who humanity is." With that, The crimson flame powered through the debris-filled space, fighting back against the Koraks' relentless assault. Even in their weakest moment, the crew of the Crimson Flame had something no one could take from them, the unyielding spirit of humanity. But the traitor remained unknown, and the fight for survival was only just beginning. The Crimson Flame lurched forward, its engines struggling against the relentless barrage of Korak fire. Each impact sent shudders through the hull, and sparks flew from damaged systems. Captain Solari stood at the helm, her fists clenched, eyes scanning the status reports flashing across the bridge. Her mind was sharp, focused, but the weight of betrayal gnawed at the edges of her thoughts. Someone on board had sabotaged the ship. The question wasn't just who, but why. "Shields are holding at 40%, Captain," Quinn called, his voice strained. "But we won't last much longer at this rate. We need to make a jump. Now." Solari barked. "Prepare the jump drive. Full power, Quinn." Quinn hesitated for just a moment, the decision heavy on his shoulders. A jump into deep space, without proper calculations, could send them into a black hole or straight into Korak territory. It was a gamble, but it was the only option. "Jump drive online," Quinn announced. "We're doing this, Captain." With a final look at Solari, he activated the jump sequence. The Crimson Flame's engines roared to life, and in a flash of light, the ship vanished from the heart of the battle. The sudden absence of incoming fire left the bridge eerily silent for a moment before the ship's automated systems beeped, confirming the jump was complete. "Where are we?" Solari asked. "Safe," Quinn said, his eyes scanning the readings. "We've exited into an uncharted system, well beyond Korak pursuit. But that also means we have no idea what's out here." As the crew breathed a collective sigh of relief, Solari turned her attention to the more pressing issue. "Scan for any signs of sabotage. Find whoever did this." "Already on it," Quinn replied. He turned to the tactical officer, Lieutenant Mora Reyes. "Run a full diagnostic on the ship's systems. Someone on board is playing a dangerous game." Mora's fingers flew across her console. There are irregularities in the communications logs. The sabotage was done remotely. Whoever did this knew the Crimson Flame inside and out. Solari's eyes narrowed. The enemy was already inside their ranks, and whoever the saboteur was, they had a plan. Lock down all access points. No one leaves this room until we found our traitor. Before anyone could respond, an urgent call came through the intercom. "Captain Solari, you need to see this." It was from the engineering deck. The crew exchanged worried glances as Solari strode to the lift. The ship's engineer, Ensign Imani Tarek, was waiting at the entrance. She was breathless, her face pale, as if she'd seen a ghost. "What's wrong?" Solari asked. "Captain, you need to see this," Imani said, leading her into the engineering bay. The room was filled with the hum of machinery and flickering lights, but there was one console flashing an alarming red. Solari approached it. "What am I looking at, Ensign?" Imani pointed to the readout. "Someone's been tampering with the reactor. There's a secondary energy surge building inside. If it goes critical, the ship will explode in minutes. Whoever sabotaged the systems didn't just disable our defenses. They've set us up for a catastrophe." A chill ran down Solari's spine. "What the hell are we dealing with here?" Imani shook her head. "This isn't just sabotage. This is someone trying to destroy us from the inside out." Solari stood tall, her eyes burning with intensity. "We're not going down that easy. Get this under control now." As Imani and her team scrambled to contain the energy buildup, Solari's mind raced. This was bigger than a simple act of rebellion. Someone wanted to wipe out humanity's last hope, and they'd gone to incredible lengths to make it happen. Back on the bridge, Solari felt the weight of responsibility press harder than ever. If they couldn't find the saboteur, the crimson flame wouldn't just be a symbol of resistance, it would become a tomb. Just then, a voice came over the intercom. It was the same cold voice that had warned her earlier. "You think you can stop the inevitable, Captain. The Korak are only the beginning. The galaxy's future is not in your hands. You will burn with your false hope." The voice echoed in her mind, and she knew the game had changed. The saboteur wasn't just trying to take down the crimson flame. They were trying to break the will of humanity itself. But Solari refused to let fear take hold. She turned to her crew, her resolve unshaken. "This is our ship. This is our fight. We will find the traitor, and we will make them regret underestimating humanity." With renewed determination, Solari set her course. No matter what awaited them in the depths of space, they would face it as one. And they would not burn out quietly. The fire of rebellion had been lit, and it would burn brighter than ever. The crimson flame drifted through the uncharted system, its engines humming steadily after the harrowing jump. With the sabotage contained, for now, Captain Solari turned her focus to the next pressing issue, finding out who had betrayed them. The ship's crew, already weary from battle, now faced an invisible enemy within their ranks. The tension in the air was palpable. Every glance between crew members seemed loaded with suspicion. Everyone was a potential traitor, and everyone knew it. Solari paced the bridge, her fingers drumming against the armrest of her chair. She needed to make decisions quickly, but her mind was scattered. The Korak would be hunting them. There was no doubt in her mind that they'd be looking for the crimson flame. And even if they managed to outmaneuver their pursuers, the sabotage was a reminder that they could never afford to let their guard down. "Captain, we've detected an incoming signal," Lieutenant Reyes reported from the tactical station. "It's not Korak, but it's coming from deep within the system." Solari straightened, sensing a potential lead. "Patch it through." The screen flickered to life, revealing a distorted message, the audio a garbled mess. The voice, though barely audible, carried a tone of disdain. "Captain Solari, you're wasting your time. The Korak are only a distraction. You will never make it to the heart of their empire. Even if you destroy their fleet, it will be meaningless." The message cut off abruptly, leaving Solari with nothing but uncertainty. The speaker knew about their mission, their target, whoever it was. They had insight into the larger scheme, perhaps even more than the Korak themselves. "I want a full analysis of that transmission," Solari commanded, her voice tight with resolve. "Whoever sent that knows more than they're letting on. We need to know who we're really fighting." Quinn approached, his expression hard. "It could be the saboteur taunting us, or something more dangerous. Someone else trying to manipulate our course." Solari nodded. "We'll find them. But first, we need to be ready. The Korak are relentless, and if we don't make our next move, they'll hunt us down like prey." A soft beep came from the communications terminal, signaling an incoming transmission. Solari's instincts kicked in. This wasn't the same distortion as before. She ordered it to be played on the main screen. The face that appeared was not one Solari recognized. The man looked human, but there was something about his eyes, cold, calculating, that sent a chill down her spine. "You've come far, Captain," he said, his voice smooth, almost too calm. "But this is where your journey ends. You've set yourself up as humanity's last hope, but you will fail. The Korak are not your true enemy, and you will be nothing more than a casualty in a much larger game." Solari's heart raced as she studied the man. He was no ordinary foe. This was someone with power, someone pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Before she could respond, the screen flickered and the transmission cut off, leaving her staring at the blank screen in disbelief. "This is bad, Captain," Quinn said, his voice low. "We've been used from the start." "We need to stay focused," Solari snapped. "Whatever game is being played, we'll fight our way through it. No one knows the Crimson Flame better than we do." Just then, the ship's sensors blared to life, filling the bridge with an urgent warning. "Multiple Korak ships, Captain," Rias shouted. "They found us." The moment of realization hit like a wave. They had been discovered. The Korak had tracked them across the stars, and now they were cornered. "Prepare for combat," Solari ordered. "All hands to battle stations. Get us out of here, Quinn. Full speed ahead." The Crimson Flame lurched forward as the crew scrambled into action. The ship's weapons systems powered up, and Solari felt the familiar rush of adrenaline surge through her veins. Despite everything, despite the sabotage, the traitors, the unknown enemies, they were still alive. And as long as they were alive, they could still fight. The Korak fleet, a massive formation of warships, loomed ahead. Their massive cannons glowed ominously as they powered up for the first strike. Solari clenched her fists. This was it. The Crimson Flame would either survive or burn. There was no middle ground. "Target the lead ship," she commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We take down their flagship, we send a message to the Korak, and we show them the cost of underestimating humanity." As the Crimson Flame powered toward the enemy fleet, the tension on the bridge was unbearable. But Solari stood tall, unwavering. They had come this far. Now they would push back with everything they had. The first blast from the Korak ship tore through space toward them, but the Crimson Flame dodged at the last moment, its advanced technology allowing it to dance around the incoming fire. Solari's eyes were sharp, every command precise. The battle was on. But as they fought, a nagging thought gnawed at Solari's mind. The sabotage, the cryptic messages, the unknown enemy lurking in the shadows. Who was pulling the strings behind the Korak? And why had they set humanity on this path of destruction? With a fierce determination, Solari pushed those thoughts aside. For now, she had only one focus: survival. The fight had just begun. The battle raged outside the Crimson Flame as it danced and weaved between blasts from the Korak fleet. Inside, the crew fought on, their focus sharpened by the chaos. The sound of heavy fire rattled the ship's hull, and alarms blared, warning of hull breaches and failing systems. But Captain Solari remained unmoved at the helm, her eyes locked onto the flashing tactical screen. "Captain, the Korak flagship is taking hits," Quinn reported, his voice tight. "Their shields are failing." "Push forward," Solari commanded, her gaze steely. "We can finish them off. Let's make them regret underestimating humanity." The Crimson Flame surged forward, its advanced weaponry unleashing devastating bursts of fire. The Korak warship staggered under the barrage, its hull cracking open in several places. A triumphant cheer rose from the crew as they saw their enemy falter, but the victory was short-lived. The bridge shook violently, throwing Solari off balance. Red warning lights flooded the room. "Captain, there's a massive energy spike coming from the Korak fleet," Rias shouted. "It's a trap." Before Solari could respond, the first wave of plasma cannons hit, raking across the Crimson Flame's starboard side. The ship's shields flickered and failed, sending a shockwave through the bridge. The force of the impact sent several crew members sprawling to the floor. "We're losing power to the main engines," Quinn yelled, frantically working his console to regain control. "Reinforce the starboard shields and get us into evasive maneuvers." Solari barked, her voice cutting through the panic. "We need to buy time." The ship swerved hard, narrowly avoiding another volley of plasma. But Solari's mind was not on the battle at that moment. Her thoughts kept returning to the saboteur, and the ominous feeling that someone on board was pulling strings from the shadows. "Who's behind this?" she muttered to herself. "Who's trying to destroy us from within?" Her suspicions had been growing since the first sabotage incident, and now the Korak trap only reinforced them. She had to find the traitor before they lost everything. Suddenly, the comms crackled to life, and a voice, a familiar one, sounded through the ship. "Captain Solari, you think you can win this fight. You're running out of time. Your crew doesn't trust you anymore." The voice was cold, calculated, sending a ripple of unease through Solari. She turned sharply to Quinn. "Shut it off. Now." The transmission cut abruptly, but the damage had been done. Someone was trying to break the morale of the crew, using her own voice to sow seeds of doubt. "Who the hell is that?" Quinn demanded, his face contorted with anger. "We're fighting a war on two fronts." Solari's mind raced. The saboteur, whoever they were, wasn't just trying to destroy the ship. They were playing psychological games, trying to break the crew's unity. "I don't know," she said through clenched teeth, "but I will find them, and they'll wish they'd never crossed me." The crimson flame continued to take fire as the Korak pressed their advantage, but Solari's resolve hardened. She couldn't let this betrayal go unanswered. She would root out the traitor, but first, they needed to survive the immediate threat. "Reyes, get me a full scan of the ship," Solari ordered. "I want every crew member accounted for, and I want to know who has access to critical systems. Someone is leaking information. Someone is feeding the Korak our every move." Reyes nodded grimly. "Understood, Captain. I'll get started right away." "Do whatever it takes to get us back on track," Solari continued. "We don't have much time before they hit us with everything they've got." As Reyes worked, Quinn turned to Solari, his face filled with concern. What if the saboteur is working with the Korak? What if they'd already planned our downfall? Solari's jaw clenched. "I won't let that happen. Whoever they are, they'll be dealt with." As she returned her focus to the battlefield, her mind kept circling back to the crew. Every one of them had been trained, tested, and trusted, but in this moment of crisis, she couldn't ignore the possibility that someone she trusted, had decided to sell them out. Suddenly, the bridge door opened, and Lieutenant Mora Reyes rushed in, her face pale with urgency. "Captain, you need to see this," she said breathlessly, holding out a data pad. "It's a list of recent communications logs. Someone on board has been sending information to the Korak." Solari's eyes locked onto the screen, her pulse quickening. The logs were detailed, too detailed. The traitor knew exactly what they were doing. They knew how to bypass the ship's security measures. "Is it someone in security?" Solari asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Reyes shook her head. "It's not just one person, Captain. It's multiple crew members. And they've been feeding the Korak our movements, our plans, even our vulnerabilities." A chill ran down Solari's spine. "How many?" Reyes hesitated, then spoke. "At least 6, people who had access to critical systems. And the patterns are clear. They've been giving the Korak our positions for days. Whoever's behind this has been playing us from the start." Solari's fists clenched. No more games. We find them, and we end this. The crimson flame burns for humanity, and I will make sure it burns brighter than ever. The betrayals aboard the Crimson Flame had begun to unravel. The fight for survival was no longer just about defeating the Korak. It was a battle to save their own crew from the destruction they had unknowingly set in motion. Solari wasn't about to let that happen. Not on her watch. The news of the multiple traitors aboard the Crimson Flame hit the crew like a tidal wave. For years, they had trusted each other, faced the horrors of war side by side, with unwavering loyalty. Now, Solari realized that trust had been shattered. The enemy was not just out there, but in their midst, and their fight for survival had just become far more complicated. "Captain," Reyes said, her voice strained as she studied the data pad. "I've isolated one of the communications signals. It's coming from the lower decks. It's not just random chatter. This person knows exactly what they're doing." Solari's eyes narrowed. "Can we trace it?" Reyes nodded grimly. "Yes, but it'll take time. The signal's encrypted, and it's being bounced off multiple relays. Whoever's behind this is trying to cover their tracks. Then we'll have to flush them out the old-fashioned way," Solari said, her voice cold with resolve. "Get security teams on the lower decks. We're going to make them talk." She turned to Quinn. "How are we holding up on the battlefield?" Quinn's face was tight with worry, his hands flying over the controls. "The Korak fleet is regrouping. They're adapting to our tactics. They know we're on the defensive now." Solari clenched her jaw. "We need to fight back. I want full power to our forward guns. If we have to go down, we'll take as many of them with us as we can." Quinn nodded, but Solari could see the doubt in his eyes. They were running out of options, and she knew it. The Crimson Flame couldn't hold out forever. "Captain," Reyes's voice cut through the tension, "we've got a lead on the traitor. The signal's originating from Deck 8. It's coming from an old supply bay." "Is it secure?" Solari asked immediately, her pulse quickening. Reyes hesitated, then shook her head. "It's been bypassed. The doors are on a manual override. Whoever's down there knows how to manipulate the ship's systems." "Get a team together," Solari ordered. "We're going in." She turned back to Quinn. "Prepare the ship for evasive maneuvers. We don't have much time." As Solari led a team of security officers through the winding corridors of the Crimson Flame, the weight of the situation pressed heavily on her chest. Each step felt like a countdown, the unknown traitor lurking somewhere just ahead. The silence of the lower decks was oppressive, except for the occasional hum of the ship's aging machinery. Every corner seemed to hold a hidden threat. When they reached the supply bay, Solari's team spread out, weapons drawn, checking every darkened corner. The door was ajar, and the override mechanism had been carefully disengaged. Someone had been waiting for them. As they entered, the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the crates and machinery. The room was eerily empty, except for a single figure standing in the far corner, shrouded in darkness. "Step forward." Solari commanded, her voice firm, but laced with urgency. "You're surrounded." The figure didn't move, and for a long moment there was silence. Then a familiar voice echoed through the room. "You really think you can stop this, Captain?" The voice was cold, almost mocking. "You've already lost. This ship, this crew. You're all nothing more than pawns." Solari's heart skipped a beat. She knew that voice. It was Lieutenant Commander Rillan Drake, one of the Crimson Flame's most trusted officers, until now. He stepped into the light, his eyes cold and hard, a cruel smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Drake. Solari's voice was a mixture of disbelief and rage. You were one of the first to volunteer for this mission. You were my right hand. How could you betray us? Drake's smile only widened. You think it was just about survival, Solari. The Korak were never the true threat. You were just a means to an end. This war was always meant to end in humanity's extinction. We were never meant to win. Solari's blood ran cold. You're working with them, aren't you? You've been feeding them information from the start. Not just information, Drake replied, his voice dripping with venom. I've been guiding them, setting up your every move. The Korak, they were always meant to win. But now, humanity's greatest hope is nothing more than a joke. The betrayal hit harder than any blow from an enemy ship. The man who had stood beside her, fought alongside her, had been the architect of their downfall all along. Solari's mind raced, but she knew she couldn't let him manipulate her any further. You've made a grave mistake, Drake, Solari said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside. And you'll pay for it. Drake's laugh echoed through the room. You're welcome to try, Captain. But the Crimson Flame is already lost. You're too late. Before Solari could react, the lights went out, plunging the room into darkness. A muffled beep sounded from the far side of the room. He's activated the ship's emergency override, Rias said quickly. He's trying to disable our systems. We need to stop them now. The countdown had already begun. Drake had one last trick up his sleeve, one final act of betrayal that would ensure the Crimson Flame's destruction. Solari's heart pounded in her chest, but she wasn't about to let this end on Drake's terms. We end this here, Solari whispered, her resolve hardening. She turned to her team. Find him. Stop the countdown. The Crimson Flame was on the brink of collapse, but Captain Solari wasn't about to let it burn without a fight. The emergency lights flickered back on, casting a dim, eerie glow over the supply bay. Captain Solari's heart pounded as the seconds ticked away. The countdown had already begun. Drake had initiated a self-destruct sequence, one that could obliterate the Crimson Flame in minutes. Every passing moment was a reminder of how quickly everything could end. Quinn, Reyes, can we stop the countdown? Solari demanded over the comms, urgency lacing her voice. Reyes' voice came through, strained. We're trying, Captain, but Drake's locked down access to the ship's main systems. We'll need time to override his codes. Solari's eyes flared with frustration, but she kept her focus. Then we'll buy you that time. No one else dies today. Turning to her security team, she barked. Move out. We're not letting Drake get away again. The crew spread out quickly, fanning across the bay and its adjacent hallways. Solari's mind raced as she pieced together what she knew of Drake's plan. He had been playing a long game, feeding the Korak false intel, sabotaging the ship, and now he was trying to destroy everything in one final act of betrayal. The Crimson Flame was more than just a ship to the crew. It was their home, their last chance at survival. Captain, we've got movement on Deck 7. Lieutenant Reyes called out, her voice edged with alarm. It's Drake. He's heading for the command center. Solari's stomach dropped. If Drake reached the command center, he could lock the ship down entirely. They would be trapped, and the countdown would finish without any hope of stopping it. Set course for Deck 7, full speed ahead. Solari ordered, her voice a tight whip. We cannot let him take the bridge. They ran through the narrow, winding corridors, each step a desperate sprint toward their final confrontation with the traitor. As they neared the stairwell leading up to Deck 7, the sound of rapid footsteps echoed ahead, followed by a burst of gunfire. Hold. Solari shouted, instinctively ducking behind a corner. She signaled for her team to spread out, weapons raised. "Captain," Quinn's voice came through the comms. "We've identified where Drake's locked us out. If you can delay him for just a few minutes, we'll break the override. You've got this." Solari's gaze hardened. Understood. She motioned for her team to advance. They reached the doorway to the command center, and Solari signaled for silence. She could feel the presence of their enemy just beyond the threshold. "On my mark," she whispered. The air was thick with tension. Drake's presence loomed nearby, the faint sound of his footsteps reverberating in the silence. He was waiting for them to make the first move. The door suddenly slammed open, and Drake appeared, his face a twisted mask of satisfaction. "You think you can stop me now?" he sneered. "It's over, Solari. There's no way you can stop the inevitable." Solari's fingers tightened around her weapon. "I'm not here to stop the inevitable, Drake. I'm here to make sure you pay for what you've done." Drake's expression faltered, just for a moment. It was as if the sheer will in Solari's eyes caught him off guard. But then he regained his composure, pulling a small handheld device from his pocket, the device controlling the self-destruct sequence. "You think I'm afraid of you?" Drake scoffed, his voice steady. "The Korak will be here any minute, and they'll finish what I started. Your fight means nothing." The air crackled with tension as Solari advanced. "You're wrong. Our fight means everything. Humanity's fight means everything. And you'll never get away with this." Without warning, she dove toward him, her body slamming into his with all the force she could muster. Drake stumbled back, but he quickly recovered, raising his device. The countdown was accelerating. Only a few moments remained. "Stop!" Solari shouted, wrestling with him for control of the device. She could feel his cold breath against her skin, his frantic desperation rising as the seconds ticked away. For a moment, they were locked in a deadly tug-of-war. Solari could see the flickering lights of the countdown timer on the device, each passing second a heartbeat closer to death. "End it, Drake." Solari growled, her grip tightening around his wrist. "Your games are over." With a sudden surge of strength, Solari twisted his arm, sending the device flying from his hand. It clattered to the floor, its display flashing wildly. Without hesitation, she kicked it out of reach. "You're finished," she spat, panting with exertion. "The crimson flame will burn brighter than your betrayal." Drake staggered back, his eyes wild with rage. He had been so close to victory, so close to ending everything. But now the tide had turned. "You think you've won," he hissed. "The Korak will destroy everything. You're not even prepared for what's coming." Solari's face remained unmoved. "I don't need to be prepared. I only need to fight. And I will. Humanity will fight." Just then, Reyes burst through the door, her team closed behind. Solari stepped back as they moved in to restrain Drake, who now seemed deflated, like a man who had lost the last of his hope. The countdown had stopped. The crimson flame had been saved, at least for now. "Get him to the brig," Solari ordered, her voice cold. "We'll deal with him later." As Drake was escorted away, Solari let out a deep breath, but it felt more like an exhale of relief than triumph. The ship was still alive, but the true battle was just beginning. There were still Korak fleets to destroy, and there were still traitors among them. And now, with the countdown stopped, Solari knew what she had to do. She would finish this fight. For humanity. For the crew. For the Crimson Flame. With Drake secured in the brig, Captain Solari stood on the bridge of the Crimson Flame, staring out at the stars. The ship was still intact, and the countdown was over, But the threat of the Korak was far from finished. The betrayal had cut deeper than any weapon. A sense of uncertainty still lingered among the crew, the damage to their trust more permanent than the damage to the ship. "Captain," Quinn's voice broke her reverie. "We've repaired most of the damage to the starboard side. Shields are back at 40%, but we're still in a precarious position. The Korak are regaining their formation, and they're preparing to strike again." Solari's gaze hardened. "We've been cornered before, Quinn. We'll fight until the last." A low rumble echoed through the ship, a reminder that the Korak were relentless. Solari knew it was only a matter of time before the Korak would launch another full-scale attack. But there was something else gnawing at her. The crew's morale was fragile, their trust fractured. The revelation of the traitors aboard the ship had left scars deeper than any plasma blast could create. "We need to re-establish command, Quinn," Solari said, her voice low but firm. "We need the crew back in their fight." Quinn hesitated but then nodded. "Understood. I'll talk to the officers, reassure them." Solari took a deep breath, trying to steady the whirlwind of thoughts in her mind. She couldn't afford the luxury of doubt or hesitation. The Crimson Flame was humanity's last hope, and its survival depended on the unity of its crew. If she couldn't restore their faith in her leadership, then everything they had fought for would crumble. "Captain," Reyes said as she entered the bridge, her face serious, "we've decrypted more of the communications Drake sent to the Korak. He wasn't just feeding them our positions, he was telling them our weaknesses. The timing of their strikes, the way they targeted our critical systems, it's all laid out." Solari's fists clenched. He knew us better than we knew ourselves. He knew exactly where to hit. "Yes," Reyes replied. "And he was working with others, Captain. There are more collaborators. They've been carefully placing people in strategic positions across the ship." Solari felt a cold anger rise in her chest. "You're telling me that Drake wasn't working alone?" "No," Reyes said, shaking her head. "This goes deeper. We've already found several officers who were involved. Not all of them are traitors, but many are compromised. The Korak used Drake's signals to infiltrate the crew and manipulate them." Solari's mind raced, but she quickly gathered herself. The situation was dire, but it wasn't over. Humanity hadn't given up in the face of overwhelming odds before, and she wouldn't let them do so now. "Lock down all communications," Solari ordered. "We can't risk anyone sending out information. Make sure every officer on this ship is vetted. No one is above suspicion." Reyes nodded sharply. "Already in progress, Captain." Solari's mind kept circling back to one question. Who else could she trust? The bonds that had been formed in the heat of battle were fraying, and she needed to repair them before the Korak had a chance to exploit the crew's vulnerability. "Get me a full crew roster," she said to Reyes. "I want to know who's left who hasn't been compromised." Reyes hesitated, her face drawn tight with concern. "Captain, there may be more people who are involved. We don't have time to do this slowly." "I don't need slow, Reyes," Solari replied, her tone resolute. "I need answers. Every moment we waste could be one where the Korak get closer to finishing what Drake started." Just then, the tactical display flared up with new data. The Korak fleet had moved into a more aggressive formation, closing in on the Crimson Flame from all sides. They were preparing to engage. Solari's resolve hardened like steel. "We're not running. We're not hiding. We fight," she declared. "Full power to weapons. I don't care what happens to this ship. We'll burn as bright as the sun before we let them take us." Quinn's voice came through the comms. "Captain, there's something else. We've received a message from the Korak flagship. Solari's expression darkened. What does it say? The response came in a voice that was cold and calculating, unmistakable in its tone. It was a challenge, one that set her teeth on edge. Captain Solari, the voice said, "Your time is over. Your ship will burn, and your people will be crushed. We have taken everything you once held dear. The crimson flame is no more than a dying ember. Come and meet us, and we will end this as you so desperately seek. We await your final surrender." The silence on the bridge was deafening. Solari's fingers tightened on the armrest of her chair. "They want us to surrender," Solari muttered, her voice like steel. "But they don't know us. They don't know what it means to be human." Quinn looked at her, a quiet determination in his eyes. "What are you thinking, Captain?" Solari stood, her back straight, her gaze fixed on the enemy fleet as it loomed ahead. She knew what they wanted. They wanted to break her, to break the crew, to force them into submission. But they had underestimated humanity's resolve. "We don't surrender," Solari said firmly, her voice carrying the weight of every man and woman aboard the Crimson Flame. "We fight." Reyes's eyes gleamed with renewed purpose. "We're with you, Captain." Solari turned to face her crew, all of them watching, waiting for her next command. She knew the odds were slim, but in that moment there was only one choice. The Crimson Flame would not go out quietly. "We fight," Solari repeated, "and we fight to win." The crew rallied around her, their spirits rising as one. The Crimson Flame would burn brighter than ever, and it would fight to the end. The final battle was about to begin. The Crimson Flame was ready. Every system was at maximum capacity, every weapon primed for battle. The ship shuddered as the Korak fleet closed in, their massive ships looming on the tactical display. Solari stood at the helm, her face set in grim determination. There was no more time for second-guessing or hesitation. This was it, the final confrontation. "Captain," Quinn's voice came through the comms. "We've got incoming fire. The Korak are launching their first wave. They're sending everything they have." "Hold your ground," Solari commanded, her voice unwavering. "Give them hell." The ship lurched as the first barrage of Korak fire slammed into the shields. The bridge was rocked with each explosion, but the Crimson Flame held strong. Solari gripped the armrests, eyes narrowed as the enemy fleet moved into position. "We've got enemy ships on our starboard and port sides," Quinn called out, his fingers dancing over the controls. "Their fighter squadrons are coming in fast." "Launch our fighters," Solari ordered. "All hands to battle stations." As the crew scrambled to their posts, the Crimson Flame's massive guns roared to life. Energy beams lanced out into the dark void of space, slamming into the Korak ships with devastating force. The first few ships exploded in fiery blossoms of light, but the Korak were relentless. More ships filled the space between them, each one a hulking mass of weapons and armor. "We've taken some hits to the aft," Reyes reported from Tactical. "Hull integrity at 60%. Shields holding, but they won't last long at this rate." Solari's jaw tightened. They needed to end this quickly. She knew that every strike from the Korak was a step closer to their destruction, but she also knew that humanity's survival had always been built on their ability to adapt, to fight when the odds were against them. "Activate evasive maneuvers, Quinn," Solari barked. "We need to keep them off our tail." The Crimson Flame twisted and spun through space, dodging incoming fire as its weapons continued to fire on the advancing Korak. Each shot that missed was a small victory, a breath of life in the chaos of battle. The ship was a blur of motion, narrowly avoiding deadly energy blasts. On the lower decks, the crew was fighting in a deadly symphony, each movement a part of the whole, each officer doing their part to keep the ship moving, to keep the weapons firing. Solari's heart swelled with pride, but the war was far from over. They're preparing for a full assault. Riaz shouted, her voice rising in urgency. They've launched their capital ship. The massive Korak warship loomed ahead, its enormous form blocking out the stars. It was the size of a small moon, bristling with weapons and armor. Solari knew that this was the heart of their fleet, and if they were going to win, they had to take it down. Target that warship. Solari commanded. Full power to forward weapons. We take them down or we die trying. Quinn nodded sharply, his fingers flying over the controls. Aye, Captain. Targeting its central power core now. The Crimson Flame's main guns roared, unleashing a barrage of concentrated energy blasts directly at the Korak capital ship. The first few shots bounced off its shields, but then the second wave of fire hit home. Sparks flew from the ship's hull, and the shields shimmered as they faltered. Shields are weakening, Quinn reported, his voice tense. We need more firepower to break through. Get the secondary weapons online, Solari ordered. We're going to push through their defenses. As the battle raged on, Solari's mind was focused solely on the enemy. The Korak were powerful, but humanity's will to survive was stronger. The Crimson Flame wasn't just a ship. It was the last hope of an entire species. And no one, not even the Korak, could snuff that out. We're about to hit their core, Quinn called out. Brace for impact. The Crimson Flame's weapons fired one last time, a concentrated blast of energy that struck the Korak warship's power core. The ship groaned, its hull cracked open as the energy coursed through its systems. And then, with a deafening explosion, the Korak capital ship shattered, its remains scattering across the void in a brilliant display of fiery destruction. We did it. Riaz shouted in disbelief. But Solari's relief was short-lived. The Korak fleet was still coming, and now the remaining ships were in disarray. They were vulnerable, but they were also desperate. The enemy wasn't about to give up without a final push. There's more coming in, Quinn said. But they're retreating. The Korak are pulling back. Solari's eyes widened as the fleet began to scatter, their formation breaking apart. It wasn't a retreat. They were reorganizing, regrouping for a final offensive. We won't give them the chance, Solari muttered, standing tall. Full speed ahead. We chased them down. The Crimson Flame surged forward, the last of its engines firing with a burst of speed. The remaining Korak ships tried to flee, but Solari wasn't about to let them escape. The fight for humanity's survival had come down to this final moment, and she wouldn't let it slip away. Ready the last of our weapons, Solari ordered. We finish this now. As the Crimson Flame engaged once more, every officer aboard understood the stakes. They had fought through betrayal, desperation, and overwhelming odds. Now, they were fighting for their future. And humanity's fire would burn, not just through this battle, but through every challenge ahead.